In the middle of a freezing Seattle night, former Navy SEAL Ethan Walker and his old K-9 Shadow heard a woman's desperate scream echoing through the storm. He didn't know her name, only that danger was closing in. Ethan charged into the alley, fists colliding with darkness, Shadow snarling beside him. When the rain cleared, a stranger lay in his arms, a woman whose secret would change his life forever. And this time, the battle wouldn't be for survival, but for redemption. Stay with us until the end. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and second chances. Rain fell like shards of broken glass over the empty industrial district of Seattle. The streets shimmered under the pale glow of a flickering street lamp, and the wind howled between rusted metal walls like a wounded animal. Ethan Walker moved through the storm with his collar turned up, his boots sinking into puddles. Once a Navy SEAL known for precision and strength, he was now a man carved by loss, broad-shouldered, early 40s, with a rough beard that hid the scars of both battle and heartbreak. His gray-blue eyes carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who had seen too much and survived too little. The cold didn't bother him anymore. It was the silence that did. Beside him trotted Shadow, a 10-year-old German shepherd with a thick coat darkened by rain, his movements still sharp despite age. The dog's left ear bore a small notch, a remnant of a mission long ago. Shadow had been his partner in the SEAL K-9 unit, and since leaving the service, the two had become inseparable, drifting together through the city's forgotten corners. Ethan often spoke to him, as if to a brother. Tonight, though, even Shadow seemed uneasy. His ears flicked back, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Ethan halted. Through the drumming rain, a faint sound pierced the night, a woman's scream, raw and terrified. His heart jerked, muscle memory snapping him awake. He scanned the alley ahead, eyes narrowing through the downpour. Two men in dark coats were dragging someone toward the shadows. Without hesitation, Ethan moved. His body still remembered the rhythm of combat, the crouch, the breath, the surge. He reached the alley in seconds. "Hey!" His voice cut through the storm. One of the attackers turned, a gleam of metal flashing in his hand. Ethan lunged, slamming him into the brick wall. The second swung wildly, but Ethan ducked, drove his elbow into the man's ribs, and twisted the weapon from his grip. A short, brutal scuffle, then silence, broken only by the rain. Both men stumbled away, clutching their wounds, vanishing into the dark. Ethan turned to the woman. She was collapsed against the wall, gasping, her face half hidden by wet strands of chestnut hair. Her coat, though soaked and torn, was clearly expensive. Gold earrings glinted faintly beneath the grime. She looked young, early 30s, perhaps with delicate features now pale from shock. Her hands trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came out. "Easy," Ethan said softly, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now." Her eyes fluttered open, hazel and filled with fear, and something else, something he couldn't name. She tried to push herself up, but her knees buckled. Ethan caught her before she fell. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Hers were sharp yet haunted, as though she carried a burden she couldn't share. "Don't tell anyone you saw me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. Then she went limp in his arms. Ethan frowned, glancing around the alley. Whoever she was, trouble wasn't far behind. He looked down at Shadow, whose tail flicked anxiously. "Looks like we're not sleeping under the bridge tonight, boy." He lifted her carefully. She was lighter than she looked, and began the long walk toward the riverbank. The city's lights shimmered on the wet asphalt, distorted and ghostly. He avoided the main streets, keeping to the dark paths known only to those who had nothing left to lose. By the time they reached his shelter, a small shanty of tarps and metal sheets beneath an overpass, the rain had softened into mist. Ethan laid her gently on his cot, covering her with his old navy blanket. He wrung out his jacket, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing. Shadow curled up nearby, still alert, his amber eyes glinting in the dim light of a flickering lantern. Ethan studied the stranger's face, elegant even in exhaustion, her lips slightly parted, her brow creased in uneasy dreams. Something about her presence stirred the fragments of humanity he thought he had buried. He wanted to believe it was just another rescue, another good deed in a broken world. But deep down, he knew this night had shifted something inside him. He sat on a wooden crate, rubbing the scar across his knuckles. "Who are you?" he murmured. Shadow's ears perked, but there was no answer, only the slow rhythm of rain against steel and the distant hum of the sleeping city. As the storm faded into a dull whisper, Ethan leaned back against the cold wall. He didn't know that the woman sleeping under his roof would change everything he had come to accept about loss, redemption, and the fragile line between duty and mercy. For now, she was just a stranger saved from the dark, and he was just a soldier trying to remember what it meant to care. Morning crept quietly over the gray city, the storm having spent itself in the night. A pale, silver light filtered through the torn fabric of the makeshift tent by the river. Ethan Walker stirred from his seat, stiff from sleeping against the wall, his breath misting in the cold air. Beside him, the woman he had rescued still lay motionless under the worn navy blanket. Her face, now freed from the shadows of the storm, appeared softer yet strangely distant, like someone carrying too much of the world inside her. She awoke with a sudden gasp, eyes wide, scanning her surroundings as if waking from a nightmare. Her voice trembled. "Where am I?" Ethan crouched nearby, his rough features illuminated by the faint glow of a lantern. "Safe," he said quietly. "You passed out last night? I brought you here." The woman studied him, the lined face, the grizzled beard, the piercing gray-blue eyes that seemed both guarded and kind. He looked like someone who had once commanded respect and now carried silence like armor. Shadow, the German shepherd, rose from where he had been lying near the door and sniffed cautiously toward her before sitting down again, tail sweeping the ground once in acknowledgement. I'm sorry," she murmured, trying to sit up. Her name hovered on her lips, but she swallowed it back. "My name's Nora," she said instead, a lie, delivered with surprising steadiness. In truth, she was Elena Carter, the CEO of Carter Innovations, a woman whose photographs once adorned the covers of business magazines. But now, hunted and betrayed by her own inner circle, the name Elena had become dangerous. Ethan nodded slightly, accepting her answer without question. "You got lucky last night, Nora. Those guys weren't amateurs." He handed her a dented canteen of water and a tin of beans. "Eat slow. You probably haven't had food since yesterday." She obeyed, though her hands still trembled. Between bites, she watched him move about the small shelter, efficient, quiet, deliberate. Every gesture spoke of discipline. His few possessions were neatly arranged: a metal flask, a weathered duffel, a folded American flag sealed in plastic. It told her everything she needed to know. This was a soldier without a home. When she finally found her voice again, she asked, "You live here?" Ethan gave a half smile, more out of habit than amusement. "Me and the dog. Been better places, been worse." He poured coffee from a small camp pot, the steam mingling with the morning mist. "You should rest before you head out. Streets aren't safe." She hesitated, weighing trust against fear. "I can't go to the police," she said suddenly. Ethan didn't react, only met her gaze with calm understanding. "Then, don't," he said. "Whoever you're running from, I'm guessing they're not small time." Her fingers tightened around the tin cup. He had read her too easily. This man, despite his rough appearance, saw more than most. "I'll leave as soon as I can walk properly," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "No rush. Storm's over, but the streets will be crawling with trouble for a while." Hours passed in quiet. Shadow kept a constant watch near the entrance, his ears twitching at distant sounds. Elena, still under the name Nora, tried to piece her thoughts together. She had been betrayed by Marcus Hale, her chief of security, a tall, broad man with a clean-shaven face and cold, strategic eyes. Marcus had been loyal for 5 years, until greed and power tempted him into the hands of corporate vultures. The failed assassination attempt had been meant to look like a mugging. As evening fell, she stood near the entrance of the shelter, gazing out at the river carrying debris from the storm. Ethan joined her silently. "Whoever you were before," he said softly, "you don't owe me your story. But you should know, sometimes the hardest part of surviving is deciding what comes after." She looked up at him, the rain-dampened air reflecting in her hazel eyes. "You talk like a man who's already lived it." He shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm still figuring it out." For a moment, neither spoke. The city across the water began to glow with evening lights, beautiful, unreachable. "You saved my life," she said finally. "I don't even know your name." "Ethan," he replied simply. "And that's Shadow. He's the one who heard you first." She bent down and gently petted the dog's head. Shadow licked her hand once, as if granting silent approval. "Thank you, Shadow," she whispered. When she straightened, Ethan was already gathering wood for a small fire. "You can stay tonight," he said, his voice practical but not unkind. "Tomorrow, I'll point you to a place you can catch a ride out of town." For a long moment, she watched him the way his shoulders carried weight, without complaint. The quiet care he showed, even in ruin. He didn't ask for gratitude, and that made her want to give it. As night deepened, the fire crackled between them, warm and fragile. Two strangers, both broken in different ways, shared silence under the same roof. In her mind, the name Elena Carter faded for a while, replaced by Nora, the woman who had almost died but somehow found refuge in the most unlikely place. When she finally lay down, her last thought before sleep was not of fear, but of the strange safety she felt beside this weathered soldier and his loyal dog. Outside, the river murmured softly under the city lights, carrying secrets neither of them were ready to tell. 3 weeks had passed since the night of rain and firelight by the river. The city had returned to its rhythm of noise and ambition, but Elena Carter moved through it like a ghost wrapped in silk and secrecy. Her dark hair now framed her face in a severe bun, her posture straight as glass, her expression unreadable, the armor of a woman who had survived betrayal. Beneath her tailored coat, however, she still bore bruises, not from fists, but from trust broken. She had regained control of Carter Innovations after silencing rumors of her disappearance, but her mind often drifted to the man in the river shelter, the one with storm-gray eyes and a voice that spoke more through silence than words. Ethan Walker. It was curiosity at first, then gratitude, then something she couldn't quite name. She asked her private investigator, Liam Navarro, to find out who he really was. Liam, a wiry man in his late 30s with sharp cheekbones, restless hands, and eyes that never stayed, still was loyal to Elena since the early days of her company. A former journalist, he had a gift for uncovering things people wanted buried. Within days, he handed her a file. "Walker, Ethan J.," Liam said, tapping the folder. "Decorated seal, Silver Star, Navy Cross. Served 15 years. Wife died of leukemia. Sold his house to pay medical bills. Disappeared 5 years ago. No family left." He paused. "He's not dangerous. Just lost." Elena closed the file slowly. "Lost," she repeated under her breath. "No one deserves to stay lost forever." That evening, she drove alone to the river district. Her car, a black Tesla Model S, looked out of place among the rusted shipping containers and graffiti-stained walls. The sky had turned copper with sunset, and the wind carried the smell of oil and damp concrete. She found Ethan near the docks, repairing a fishing net for an old man who sold scrap metal nearby. He looked different in daylight, still rugged, but calmer, like the sea before a storm. Shadow sat beside him, fur cleaner now, tail beating the dust lazily. Ethan looked up as she approached. For a moment, his brows furrowed in confusion. Then recognition softened his face. "Nora?" he said, standing. "Guess that's not your name after all." She smiled faintly. "No, it's Elena. Elena Carter." He blinked once, expression unreadable. "The billionaire," he muttered. "I should have guessed from the shoes." She laughed softly, though there was guilt behind it. I wasn't hiding from you, Ethan. I was hiding from people who wanted me gone. He nodded, eyes drifting toward the horizon. Makes sense. The world's got more snakes in suits than in swamps. Helena hesitated, then held out a small business card. I came to ask you something. I run a foundation called Second Chance. We train rescue dogs and help veterans find purpose again. I need someone who knows both soldiers and dogs. Ethan looked at the card, but didn't take it right away. You want a homeless man to work with millionaires' pets? It's not about charity, she said quietly. It's about people who understand survival. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. The wind tugged at his coat, and Shadow leaned against his leg as if to anchor him. Finally, he took the card. I'll think about it. The next morning, he arrived. The Second Chance Training Center stood on the outskirts of the city, a refurbished warehouse surrounded by open fields and chain-link fences. The air smelled of sawdust and dog fur. Volunteers moved briskly, training German Shepherds, Labradors, and Belgian Malinois. Ethan's presence drew a few curious looks. His worn jeans, his military stance, the way he seemed both part of the room and apart from it. Elena watched from the office window as he began his first session. Shadow trotted beside him, acting as both teacher and guardian among the younger dogs. Ethan's voice, calm but commanding, cut through the noise. A dog mirrors your heart. If you're scared, he's scared. If you're steady, he'll follow you through hell. The trainees fell silent, captivated. Later, when she handed him a coffee, he simply nodded. Didn't think I'd be back in uniform, he said, glancing at his reflection in the window, his posture straighter, his eyes brighter. Feels strange. Strange can be good, she said. Sometimes it means healing. He turned toward her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled, not the polite curve of lips, but something real, fragile, human. Over the next weeks, their paths crossed, often morning briefings, shared lunches, late nights reviewing rescue reports. Elena found herself laughing again, something she hadn't done since before the betrayal. Ethan, meanwhile, began to feel the stirrings of belonging, something he thought war had burned out of him. But one evening, as the sun dipped behind the fences, Ethan noticed a sleek black SUV parked too long across the street. A man inside wore a dark suit and mirrored glasses. Ethan's instincts sharpened. When he mentioned it to Elena, her face tightened briefly before she brushed it off. It's nothing, she said, but her hands trembled slightly when she turned away. That night, alone with Shadow by the kennels, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the war he thought he'd left behind might be waiting just beyond the gates. The night of the grand opening was supposed to mark a new beginning. Strings of warm light stretched across the courtyard of the Second Chance Training Center, swaying gently in the cool breeze. Veterans, volunteers, and donors mingled under a banner that read, "Because every soul deserves another chance." Elena Carter stood at the center of it all, radiant but guarded, her navy dress modest yet elegant, her hair swept back into a low bun. To anyone watching, she was the image of composure, but beneath her calm surface, unease pulsed like a quiet drumbeat. Ethan Walker sensed it too. Dressed in a clean black jacket and dark jeans, he stood beside Shadow, whose sharp eyes scanned every corner. The dog, now fully recovered from his old scars, carried himself like a sentinel, his tail low, ears flicking at every sound. Ethan's instincts, honed by years of combat, were restless. Too many unfamiliar faces, too many men pretending to be security. Across the crowd, he noticed a tall figure near the entrance, a man in a charcoal suit, head shaved, clean cut, but his posture military. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The man met his gaze briefly, then turned away, speaking into a small earpiece. Ethan leaned closer to Elena and murmured, "We might have company." She stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Someone's watching us." Trained eyes. Before she could respond, Liam Navarro approached from behind, holding a tablet. He was wearing a dark blazer over a wrinkled shirt, hair tied back loosely, the journalist in him, always bleeding through professionalism. "Elena," he said quickly, "I just got an alert. The external server's been breached. Someone's trying to copy our financial archive." Her blood ran cold. "Where?" "The internal office. Second floor." Ethan was already moving. "Stay here," he ordered. "Keep people calm." Shadow followed, muscles tense beneath his thick fur. Upstairs, the hall was dimly lit, the hum of computers echoing faintly. The door to the data room hung ajar, its lock forced. Ethan pushed it open and froze. Two men in black tactical gear were hunched over the central terminal, one pulling cables while the other inserted a drive. They looked up identical in their precision and lack of surprise. Mercenaries. The kind he'd once trained alongside. The taller of the two, blonde, scar on his jaw, late 30s, smirked. "Walker," he said, in a deep, gravelly voice. "Didn't think we'd meet again." Ethan's stomach clenched. "Grayson," he muttered. Caleb Grayson, a former SEAL turned private contractor, once Ethan's teammate, now a mercenary for hire. The years had hardened him. Short-cropped blonde hair, pale eyes that had seen too much, and a grin that never reached them. "You shouldn't be here," Ethan said quietly. Grayson shrugged. "Orders, old friend. Nothing personal," Shadow growled low, teeth bared. The second man, Rico, shorter, stocky, with a jagged scar along his temple, raised his weapon. "Don't," Ethan warned. But the click of the safety came anyway. Then everything moved fast. Ethan lunged forward, knocking the gun aside as it fired. The bullet ricocheted off the metal cabinet. Shadow leapt at Rico, sinking his teeth into the man's arm. Grayson swung his fist, catching Ethan across the jaw, but Ethan countered, driving his elbow into Grayson's ribs. The room erupted in chaos shouts, the smell of gun oil, the metallic taste of adrenaline. From downstairs came a scream, Elena's voice. Grayson used the distraction to slam Ethan into the desk, sending the monitor crashing. "You should have stayed buried," he hissed. Ethan drove his knee upward, breaking free, but a second gunshot split the air. Shadow yelped a short, sharp sound that tore through Ethan like lightning. The shepherd staggered back, blood blooming on his shoulder. "No!" Ethan roared, firing his sidearm once, a clean, practiced shot. Grayson fell. Rico dropped his weapon and fled through the window, vanishing into the night. Ethan crawled to Shadow, pressing his hand against the wound. "Stay with me, boy. You're okay. You're okay." Shadow's breathing was ragged but steady, his eyes locked on Ethan's face, refusing to close. Moments later, sirens wailed outside. Liam and two officers burst into the room, weapons raised. "They're gone," Ethan said hoarsely, lifting his hands. "One dead, one escaped." Elena appeared at the doorway, pale and trembling. Her gaze went straight to Shadow. "Oh God." She knelt beside them, voice breaking. "Ethan, we have a vet clinic on site. We can save him." He nodded, his jaw tight. Together they carried Shadow downstairs, as police began securing the area. The once celebratory courtyard was now a scene of flashing lights and scattered panic. Liam directed officers, while Elena stayed close to Ethan, her hand gripping his shoulder. Hours later, after the surgery, the vet emerged a middle-aged woman named Dr. Harper, short, with cropped gray hair and kind eyes. "He'll live," she said softly. The bullet missed vital organs. Ethan exhaled for the first time since the shot. Elena stood beside him in the sterile hallway, eyes glistening. "You saved all of us," she whispered. He shook his head. Shadow did. She reached for his hand, fingers trembling. "No, Ethan. This time, you didn't just save me, you saved yourself." Outside, the first light of dawn stretched across the city, painting the wet streets in gold. In the recovery room, Shadow slept peacefully, his chest rising and falling. Ethan sat beside him, exhaustion etched into every line of his face, but for the first time in years, the weight of guilt seemed to lift. In the reflection of the hospital window, he saw Elena standing behind him. For a moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. Somewhere between loss and survival, between war and healing, they had found something worth fighting for again. 3 months had passed since the night of chaos, and the world had begun to breathe again. The Second Chance Training Center had risen from the wreckage stronger than ever, its walls repainted, its kennels filled with the sound of barking and laughter instead of gunfire. Veterans who once wandered the streets now wore uniforms again, not of war but of purpose. Among them walked Ethan Walker, his posture no longer bent by the weight of regret. The city had honored him publicly. The Navy had restored his service record, and the bank had quietly erased the last traces of the debt that had once destroyed his life. But it wasn't medals or money that gave him peace. It was the steady rhythm of Shadow's pause beside him and the quiet presence of Elena Carter. Elena had changed too. The sharp edges of the corporate empress had softened. Her face, once taut with control, now held warmth. She no longer wore power suits every day. Instead, simple blouses and jeans. Her long hair, sometimes tied, sometimes loose, caught easily by the wind when she walked the training grounds. The woman who had once commanded boardrooms now spent her mornings feeding dogs and speaking gently with the veterans who came to heal. Her laughter, when it came, was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Every morning, she found Ethan already at work. He moved among the kennels, his deep voice carrying calm authority. "Easy, good boy. Patience before pride," he'd say, as he trained both dogs and men with the same philosophy. Shadow, now fully healed, had taken the role of mentor among the younger dogs, tolerant, wise, and occasionally mischievous, when he'd steal a glove just to watch Ethan chase him. One afternoon, the center received an unexpected visitor. Captain Raymond Lewis, a retired Navy officer in his 50s, tall with iron gray hair, sharp jawline, and a bearing that still commanded attention. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes betrayed fatigue, the kind earned from watching too many soldiers break. He clasped Ethan's hand firmly. "Walker," he said, voice rough but genuine. "Didn't think I'd see you standing tall again. You did good, son. Damn good." Ethan smiled faintly. "Still learning to stand, sir." Lewis nodded toward Elena, who approached with polite curiosity. "And you must be the woman who gave him back his fight." Elena shook his hand. "He didn't need me for that. He just needed a reason," the captain chuckled. "Then you gave him that reason. I'd call that service." He left soon after, leaving behind a signed Navy commendation and an unspoken understanding Ethan's redemption was complete. As weeks turned into summer, Second Chance grew beyond what either of them imagined. Reporters came and went. Donors offered more money than Elena wanted. "We'll take what helps the mission," she'd insist, "but not what sells the soul." Ethan respected that about her refusal to turn compassion into commerce. At night, when the grounds were quiet, they would sometimes share coffee in the office, papers scattered between them, the scent of rain drifting through the open window. One such evening, Elena found Ethan standing alone by the fence, looking toward the sea. The sky was painted in molten gold and violet. She joined him, hands tucked into her coat. "You're quiet," she said. "Thinking," he replied, "about how strange it feels to belong somewhere again." She smiled. "You earned it." He turned to her, eyes steady. "So did you." They stood in silence for a while, the kind that said more than words could. Shadow wandered between them, his fur glinting in the sunset, tail sweeping softly against their legs. Later that week, the city invited Elena and Ethan to receive a humanitarian award for Second Chance. The ceremony was held in a grand hall, filled with chandeliers and applause. Elena, dressed in an elegant dark gown, gave a short speech about redemption and resilience. Ethan, uncomfortable in a suit, simply said, "We didn't build this to be heroes. We built it to prove that broken things can still protect and heal." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Afterward, outside the hall, rain began to fall soft, clean, gentle. Elena laughed, lifting her face to the sky. "Seems like Seattle never forgets the rain," she said. Ethan handed her his jacket. "Or maybe it's reminding us how we met." They walked together down the quiet street toward the harbor. The sea reflected the lights of the city like scattered stars. Elena stopped by the railing, her gaze lost in the horizon. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think losing everything was the end. But maybe it was just the beginning." Ethan leaned beside her, eyes on the same distant glow. "You're right. No one really loses everything, not if they still have someone left to save." She turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You mean like I had you?" He smiled, resting his hand gently on Shadow's head. "Like we all have each other." A gust of wind carried the smell of salt and rain. The clouds parted, revealing a sliver of light breaking through the gray. For a long moment, the world felt still, just the murmur of the waves, the steady breath of a dog, and the heartbeat of two souls who had finally found home in the wreckage. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly, through the hands of ordinary people who choose kindness when the world gives them every reason not to. Ethan's journey reminds us that redemption is never out of reach, that faith is not just found in churches, but in the small mercies we give to one another. Maybe the miracle you've been waiting for begins with a single act of compassion today. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment about your own moment of grace, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate faith, love, and second chances. May God bless you and keep you, and may His light guide your path through every storm.